Hey, welcome back to The White Flag. My name is Jonathan Moynihan. I'm your host, and this podcast exists to help you get off the endless treadmill of spiritual exhaustion and find hope and joy and rest by surrendering to Jesus. And this is episode 3. So we're doing it. We're actually kind of grinding here doing this thing. And let me tell you, after launch last week, it has just been so encouraging. I've been so honored to hear what God has already been up to before this thing ever got started. It's just more apparent to me than ever that God's timing is perfect, that even this endeavor is right on time, because so many of you have reached out to me, letting me know that God had already begun sort of stirring this restlessness and a desire for you to slow down, get centered, and even to reevaluate the pace in which you walked with God coming out of the year that was 2020. And to be honest, I'm just feeling like I'm riding the wave of what God is already up to. And that is such a sweet place to be living in. And so thank you to all of you who have tuned in, who have let me know that this has been helpful to you in even some small way. And again, if God is moving in your life, helping you take steps toward courageous surrender, I'd love to hear about it. You can contact me at my website, jonathanmoynihan.com. All that information will be in the episode details. But with it being episode 3, I am ready to date myself a little bit. I'm ready to let you know how old I am, because I'm going to tell you one of my absolute favorite bands growing up was the band Blink-182. Anyone out there with me? Yes? Blink-182? Come on, man. So good. They're basically like a pop punk band that was really big in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, some of you are very familiar with their songs, but one of their biggest hits, I'm not saying it's their best song, but one of their biggest hits was this song called All the Small Things. And the reason it got so big, I think, wasn't because it's a particularly great song, but because the music video for it that was on Total Request Live, TRL, and MTV, it was one of the first music videos I can remember, right? And it was a music video that basically made fun of boy band music videos, because this was about the most romantic Blink-182 would get. I mean, the song is a love song, but it's kind of like a sad, adorable, pathetic sixth grader love song, because the lyrics are like 2 verses and the chorus is na 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 na. Like, it's not fancy. But I'm giving Blink-182 a lot of credit. I think it's a love song, maybe it wasn't. But anyway, they poked fun in their entire music video at this like saturated romance culture of boy bands. And for the record, real quick, NSYNC is the greatest boy band of all time. I don't know how you would argue against that. However, Backstreet Boys have the best boy band song of all time, and I Want It That Way. I want it that way. That's not. It's moving. Okay, like it's a transcendent song. So it's the best boy band song of all time, but NSYNC is the best boy band as a group of all time. Anyway, back to Blink-182. So Blink-182 did this song, and it was huge. Their music video was really fun. I mean, if you're not familiar with it, you can go listen to it and enjoy it. It's like a fun little bop your head kind of song. And I get it. It's not Beethoven. I'm not some cultured, fancy person. I like Blink-182. It's fine. But something that's been really interesting about this song, and I know this sounds weird, this song, All the Small Things, has been kind of like in my head over the last year as I've kind of navigated some of the things that have led me to this place of wanting to launch this show. Because the song, All the Small Things, really encapsulates something that I think many of us miss when it comes to walking with Jesus. And it's been a song that's been in my head as I've navigated this last year of, going through waves of, man, my time with God, my solitude, my quiet time, all that stuff is great. And then sometimes it's like not so great, and I feel like I'm just kind of doing it because I'm supposed to. But this song, All the Small Things, more importantly, the phrase, All the Small Things, has been ringing in my head because it gives me a guide to get centered as I keep trying to learn from Jesus. And this phrase, all the small things, is the thing I want to help us remember as we try to move past being fans of Jesus or even passive followers of Jesus, and we try to become what spiritual mentors of mine have said, being apprentices to Jesus, because it's all about all the small things. And when it comes to Jesus, this idea of all the small things or all the pieces matter, this is what I want to help us see. Because when I started looking at all the small things in Jesus' life, as I started to study him, not just what he said, but all the small things that he did, I discovered some practical ways to really move past, like I said, being a fan or follower of Jesus, but to becoming an apprentice to Jesus, because those are different things. And I was initially turned on to a lot of this by a pastor named John Mark Comer. He's a pastor out of Portland, Oregon, and he's, for me, one of the most important Christian voices in the world right now as we navigate post-Christian and postmodern culture, and even like a context that kind of makes the way in which we live increasingly hostile to the practices of Jesus. I'm trying to call all of us to today. But even on top of that, John Mark Comer is just one of the most influential pastoral voices in my own life. I mean, the fact that I got to interview his friend Tyler Staton last week on the show, I was like pinching myself. Like I could not believe it. So I've learned a lot from him. But John Mark writes about this idea. He doesn't call it all the small things because he's smarter, more complex than I am. But he writes about this. And so a good chunk of some of what I'll share with you, I've learned from him by watching him. But here's why we got to look at all the small things, why we have to realize all the pieces matter if we are going to step into becoming apprentices to Jesus. Most of what we know about Jesus comes from the four Gospels. And the Gospels of Jesus are essentially biographies. And most of the content in the biographies of Jesus aren't just what he taught, they're how Jesus lived. Now, when you think about biographies for a second, why do we read biographies in the first place? Usually you pick a biography to read because you're impressed with that person, you want to become like that person, or maybe you want to make sure you don't become like that person. But biographies are really successful because they help us emulate success or avoid failure. And so in reading about someone else, we get to better understand how they functioned and maybe how we can function as we try to pursue maybe some of the same things that they did. And so you may read a biography of someone like Steve Jobs or Michelle Obama or Elon Musk or Winston Churchill or Dave Grohl or Tiger Woods or something like that. And you do that. And when you do, you don't just look at what they said. What really interests you in a biography is how they lived. The real benefit of a biography is when you start to see the little overlooked details of their life that a good biographer can figure out or point out. And if you're smart, if you want to become like that person, you'll start to copy those details, those individual habits that the person had, in hopes that they'll foster a similar kind of production or life change or transformation in your own life. So if you are learning from a politician and you want to be like them, and they went to X law school, you want to go to that law school. Or if you are learning from a fitness person and you realize, oh, they skipped breakfast every day and only drank tea at night, blah, 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 you want to do that. Or if you see this, killer female CEO took a nap every day and had a couch in her office, you're like, yo, I want to go do that. And so we do all these things. We try to copy all the details of this person because we know eventually the cumulative effect of adopting all of these practices, even the small, minute, overlooked ones in their life, if we embrace those things, they could help us experience a new way of life. So that's what we get when we read great biographies. But here's the problem. The Gospels are biographies, but the issue is very few of us read the four Gospels that way. We read the Gospels as if they're full of like cute sermon illustrations or allegorical pick-me-ups or just theological tweetables, and those are true. That's all in there. Those aren't inherently bad things. But if that's all we look at the Gospels for, we're getting an incomplete view of what they are because they are biographies that highlight not just what Jesus said, but the lifestyle he practiced. And here's what I'm saying. The stories about the details of Jesus' life are just as valuable as his teachings and the miracles he performed. And here's why. Because you cannot experience the promises of Jesus if you don't adopt the lifestyle he practiced. I'm going to say that again. You cannot experience the life Jesus promised if you don't adopt the lifestyle he practiced. And what made Jesus Jesus was not just that he was the Son of God, and not just that he healed people, and was not just that he said incredible, amazing, transcendent things that our culture is still now just understanding how true Jesus has always been. It's not just those things. It's that as his followers, if we are to become like Jesus, we need to not just regurgitate and live out the truth that he says, but in our own spiritual walks and becoming like him, we have to imitate his practices and read the Gospels as biographies to pick up on all the small things that can teach us and lead us to live that life that is free and light. Here's just one example. In Luke Jesus bursts onto the scene. He's lived most of his life as just kind of a normal Jewish guy. And then he begins his ministry and he gets baptized by John the Baptist. And a voice from heaven speaks and God says, "This is my son in whom I am well pleased." And that's a pretty big moment. I mean, Jesus's social stock must be soaring. The Romans are sending TMZ to take pictures like he's a big deal. So what's the first thing that Jesus does in response to all this new notoriety? It says in Luke 4 that Jesus, full of the Spirit, returned from the Jordan River and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness where he was tempted by the devil for 40 days. And the direct translation of that Greek word for wilderness means the place where no one else is. So an added phrasing that comes in my Greek dictionary says that this wilderness was a place that was solitary, lonely, and desolate. So the first thing we see Jesus do coming out of his baptism is he withdraws. He removes himself from this great moment of commotion and excitement, and he goes into solitude for 40 days. Then he comes back, and in Luke 5, it says Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness to pray. So he's going again back to that wilderness place, the place where no one else is. Now, pause real quick. I think it's fascinating that God knew not to include Jesus' personality type in the Bible, because God knew that you and I would want to know, like, what's Jesus' Enneagram or what's Myers-Briggs, and then we would kind of like pick and choose parts of his life and think that maybe some of them only apply to introverts or extroverts, but that's not what we see in Scripture. God made it clear you are to adopt everything that he lived out. He took off the excuses that you and I might put on Jesus and say, well, that doesn't apply to me, because the lifestyle practiced by Christ is what is to be modeled by anyone who wants to become like Christ, aka be a disciple, aka be an apprentice and become an apprentice to Jesus. And Luke says that Jesus withdrew often. And so because we don't know Jesus' personality trait, you and I don't get to say, well, that's just for introverts, or that's just for extroverts, or that's just for stoic, contemplative people. No, this is a practice of Jesus you and I are all called to do. I mean, even when the religious elite are berating him for healing a woman on the Sabbath, I mean, it's a pretty boss move. But what does Jesus do? They're plotting to kill him. He knows that. He climbs up on a mountain to pray overnight by himself. He withdraws once again and then comes back down and selects the 12 men who would be his disciples and launch this global movement called the church. Now, real quick, this doesn't mean Jesus prayed a lot, so I should pray a lot. Like, that's not what this is about. Jesus is not just getting away to pray. Something huge here is happening, where not only is he praying, but he's withdrawing from the world. He's entering into lengths of silence and stillness and centeredness and solitude. And out of the overflow of these moments, Jesus would do amazing things. There is a sustaining strength that keeps Jesus going as his ministry continues. And what's more interesting to me is that the more in demand Jesus became, the more often he withdrew. And it's kind of backwards from what you and I would think. You know, like the more important you become, the more influential you are, the more you need to be in demand, the less time you're going to have for yourself. But the more in demand Jesus became, the more often he withdrew to get centered with God. And this withdrawal wasn't like me time where I just refresh my batteries and have my phone. Jesus was withdrawing to draw from the well of solitude and privacy with his heavenly Father. And I'm bringing up all this because if you pay attention to the small things, all the small things, you'll notice that these practices, sometimes we just chalk them up to say, oh, well, Jesus just did that, instead of realizing that it's actually in these small habits that we can become apprentices to Jesus by not just listening to what he said, but imitating the way he lived. Now, I'm going to be honest. I know hearing this, like, all right, John's talking about withdrawing or getting away from people, going into the woods, whatever. I know some of you hearing this are like, I don't get it. You're like, so I'm just supposed to just sit in the woods? Like, I would rather just sit on my own couch and be on my phone. And even though I know I don't ever feel better after being on my phone for a long time, I'm just going to do that because it's what I know. I get it. I've been there. And it's kind of like, remember that art show a while ago when a guy taped a banana with some duct tape on a wall and they called it art, and then someone paid $150,000 for it? Listen, I know that some of you, when you hear me talk about withdrawing and just going into the woods and not doing anything, it feels about as crazy as paying for a banana duct tape to a wall. Like, I get that. But here's what I want to do. I want to help you take baby steps to becoming an apprentice to Jesus and embracing and adopting all the small things, not just the big quotes, and help us get motivated to remember that the life Jesus promises is only available when we adopt the life he practiced. Listen, I'll say it again. The full life Jesus promised is only available when we adopt the lifestyle he practiced. So my big challenge to you this week is to plan, map out, and try at least once this week to get away from the day. That's all I want you to do. I want to help you get away from the day. I'm not saying you got to be gone for 40 days. I'm not telling you to go on a silent solitude retreat like I did. I'll tell you more about that in a later episode. It could be 30 minutes. You could try to aim for an hour. If you're a mother of 2 young children, you probably can give 10 minutes. And please note, you are glorifying God when you try to give him those 10 minutes because you're taking a risk to get away and get centered with him. That's great. But I want to challenge you to get away to pray. No phone, no books, just you and the Bible, maybe a journal. And listen, I know that you may not know what to do when you get away and withdraw. And that's okay. We'll get there. The goal here is to build the muscle that enables you to step into this sacred place. We'll discuss what to do later, but many of us need to learn how do we even build the capacity to step away from the hurried pace of life so we can imitate Jesus and get centered as he constantly did. See, I think it's kind of like the gym. A lot of people don't go to the gym or get nervous about the gym because they don't know what to do when they're at the gym. But the truth is their big problem isn't that they don't know what to do when they're there. They don't know how to get there. They don't know how to actually get out of their house in the morning. They don't know how to actually leave work and go to the gym instead of going to get an iced coffee full of cream and sugar, like I do a lot of the time. But they just don't know how to do it. And so that's what I'm trying to focus on today. I want to help us build a muscle, build a spiritual rhythm so that we can learn not just what to do when we're in that quiet space. We'll talk about that. But how do we even get there? How do we build the muscles to actually adopt these practices of Jesus? And I know this is going to cause friction for some of you because you've got grad school and it's like running your life. You've got a newborn. Your marriage is sapping everything out of you, or family drama is so bad that it makes you feel physically sick. And I say this a lot, but in those moments, that's when you need the presence of God the most. That's when you need to learn like the sustaining and loving and restful and calming presence of God that can come in the midst of the chaos. But we are never going to experience the presence of God or hear the voice of God if we lived at a pace or a volume that drowns out his voice. And so even just learning how to get away from the day is going to slowly be a building block that you can build upon so that when life is crazy, as I know it is for some of you, you'll be able to experience this gift of withdrawing with God. And I'm convinced that as we pursue courageous surrender, this is possibly the most formative tool that we'll have in our arsenal to fight against the tyranny of the urgent and the violence of the noise in our culture that eventually is going to erode the quality of our soul if we don't learn how to push back. And that's what I want to help us do. To stop, to sit with God, and even before we learn how to sit with God, learn to sit with ourselves and all the mess that comes up from it. And learn how do we become an apprentice to Jesus by adopting all the small things, all those simple practices of getting away that Jesus imitated over and over again, even as he became more influential. It's all about the small things. I want to encourage you to read the New Testament as you learn from Jesus, and don't just look at what he says, but look at how he lived. Realize all the pieces matter as we seek to become apprentices to Jesus. Here's how Paul put it in Philippians 4:9. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. And then Jesus himself in Luke 6, after he appoints all the disciples, here's what he says when he's addressing this large crowd. Why do you keep calling me Lord when you don't do what I say? I will show you what it's like when someone comes to me, listens to my teaching, and then follows it. It's like a person building a house who digs deep and lays the foundation on solid rock. Listen, having the right worldview about Jesus doesn't help you. Imitating his practices is what leads to life. Another pastor that's been formative for me is an Australian named John Tyson. He leads a church up in New York City. And he said this, quote, "We think that having a Christian worldview is what stops us from having our life destroyed. Not at all. There's a lot of people with great theology who collapsed in 2020. It's those who obey and put into practice what Jesus taught that can withstand the onslaught of life. And this is so true, that those who endure chaos are not the ones who necessarily have the most Bible verses memorized, even though that's a good thing, and we'll talk about that in later episodes. But those who endure chaos are the ones who are centered on their foundation of Christ, by imitating the way that he lived and experiencing human flourishing as Jesus defined it, and learning how to combat the tyranny of the urgent and the noise of our culture by learning to get away from the day as Jesus did and withdraw to be with our Heavenly Father. We'll talk more about what to do in that time. But this week, let's learn to build that muscle and build a rhythm where we learn to step away as Jesus did and realize that the power of who he was and who he is was not just in what he said, but in how he lived. And so as you and I seek to become apprentices, let's focus on all the small things because all the pieces matter. So here's the homework this week. Do the work to get away from your day. You can do it right now. You could finish this episode and get out a notepad and look at your calendar this week and know, okay, this day there'll be this time, and I can make a plan to try to get away, to do nothing. You're making a plan to do nothing, which is great. And remember, you're not going to know what to do when you're there. I'd encourage you to pick a psalm or pick a proverb or keep going through your Bible reading plan. But the goal here is not to make this the best quiet time ever. It's to build the muscle that helps you withdraw. And in order to experience the life Jesus promised, we must become apprentices to him and adopt and imitate the lifestyle he practiced. Hey, thanks for tuning in to the third episode of The White Flag. It's a huge honor to have you here. It's great to have someone check out a podcast after its first launch, but then that second week, it's when you kind of find out, is this really helpful for anybody? So if you're here, man, super honored to have you. I'd love to hear from you. Like I said, you could contact me on Instagram at jonathan.moynihan or email me via the website jonathanmoynihan.com. And as always, listen, this is not just a Jonathan production. This is a Mosaic Christian Church production. If you are in the Baltimore, Maryland, DMV area, I would love to say hello and have you join me at Mosaic at one of our two services on Sundays at 9:30 and 11:15. You can find more at mosaicchristian.org or follow us on Insta at mosaicmd. All that information and more will be in the episode details. But man, much love to you. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll talk real soon.